What if the earliest warning sign of dementia has nothing to do with memory? Not forgetting names, not getting lost, not even losing your keys. What if the very first clues begin years earlier, in places most people never think to look? Your sense of smell, your motivation, the way you walk across a room, the words that suddenly disappear in the middle of a sentence, or even the strange movements your partner notices while you sleep. And that is exactly why so many families miss the warning signs until it is far too late. According to researchers at Harvard Medical School and the National Institute on Aging, subtle changes in behavior, movement, and sensory processing can begin long before obvious memory loss appears. In some cases, these changes may emerge nearly a decade before a formal dementia diagnosis. That means the brain may start whispering long before it starts screaming. And most people never hear those whispers. I remember speaking with an older gentleman who told me something that stayed with me for years. He said, "Doctor, I thought I was just getting older. I didn't realize my brain was slowly changing." That sentence breaks my heart because millions of older adults are thinking the exact same thing right now. They dismiss the signs. Their families dismiss the signs. Even doctors sometimes dismiss the signs because the symptoms do not look dramatic at first. A man stops caring about hobbies he once loved. A woman suddenly struggles to name common objects. Someone walks a little slower while talking. A husband begins shouting during dreams at night. Individually, these changes may seem harmless, but together, they can paint a very different picture. Now let me say something very clearly before we continue. Experiencing one of these signs does not mean you have dementia. Aging changes all of us. Stress changes us. Sleep problems, medications, anxiety, even loneliness can affect the brain in powerful ways. But recognizing patterns early gives you something incredibly valuable: time. Time to speak with a doctor. Time to protect your brain health. Time to make lifestyle changes. Time to explore treatments and support before symptoms become severe. And in brain health, early action can change everything. So today, we are going to walk through 5 surprising early signs of dementia that many people completely overlook. Signs that often appear years before memory problems begin. Some of them may surprise you. Some may feel deeply familiar. And one of them might explain something you have been noticing in yourself or someone you love. Before we begin, take a moment to comment below. Which of these signs worries you the most as you get older? And if you believe more seniors deserve to hear information like this, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone you care about. Because sometimes one conversation can truly change a life. Sign number 1. When your nose notices changes before your memory, have you noticed that food does not smell as strong as it used to? Maybe coffee in the morning feels weaker. Fresh bread no longer fills the kitchen the same way. Perfume, flowers, even the smell of rain seems strangely distant now. Most people brush this off as a normal part of aging. And honestly, sometimes it is. Our sense of smell naturally becomes less sensitive as we grow older. Allergies, sinus problems, smoking, medications, and even past COVID infections can all affect the nose. But what many people do not realize is this: your nose is directly connected to some of the brain's most important memory centers. Deep inside the brain sits a region called the hippocampus, responsible for memory and learning. Right beside it is another structure known as the entorhinal cortex. These are among the very first areas affected in Alzheimer's disease. And the nerve responsible for smell sends signals directly into this exact region. That means changes in smell may sometimes appear years before noticeable memory problems begin. Researchers from the Mayo Clinic and several European memory institutes found that older adults who suddenly struggled to identify familiar smells were statistically more likely to develop cognitive decline later in life. Not simply smelling something faintly, but failing to recognize what the smell actually was. That distinction matters. For example, someone may smell cinnamon but cannot identify it. They notice coffee brewing but cannot quite connect the scent to coffee anymore. The brain receives the signal, but the recognition process begins to weaken. I once spoke with a retired teacher in her 70s who told me she stopped enjoying cooking. At first, she blamed aging. Then she blamed the pandemic. But what truly bothered her was not the loss of smell itself. It was the strange emotional disconnect that came with it. "The world feels flatter," she said quietly. That sentence stayed with me because smell is deeply tied to emotion, comfort, memory, and human connection. A familiar scent can instantly transport us back decades. Childhood kitchens, holiday dinners, a loved one's perfume. When those connections begin fading, people often feel something is off long before they understand why. Now, this is important. A reduced sense of smell alone does not mean dementia, not even close. But if the change is sudden, persistent, getting worse, or happening alongside other unusual changes, it deserves attention. One simple thing you can try at home is occasionally testing yourself with familiar scents. Coffee, peppermint, lemon, cinnamon, vanilla. Can you recognize them quickly without seeing them? And even more importantly, has someone around you noticed changes before you have? Because very often, family members notice subtle differences first. The good news is that brain health is not fixed in stone. Sleep quality, exercise, blood pressure control, social activity, and proper nutrition all influence how the brain ages over time. Sometimes your nose is not just smelling the world around you. Sometimes it is quietly telling you what is happening inside your brain. Sign number 2. The quiet disappearance of motivation. There is a difference between being tired and slowly losing your spark. And families can usually feel that difference long before they can explain it. Maybe it starts small. A man who never missed a football game suddenly stops checking the scores. A grandmother who called her grandchildren every Sunday quietly stops reaching out. Someone who once loved gardening now sits in silence for hours, staring out the window. Without interest. Not sad. Not emotional. Not obviously depressed. Just disconnected. This condition is known medically as apathy, and it is one of the most overlooked early behavioral signs linked to dementia, especially Alzheimer's disease and frontotemporal dementia. Now here is what makes this sign so difficult. The person experiencing it often feels perfectly fine. That is what confuses families the most. Depression usually hurts. People feel hopeless, heavy, miserable, exhausted emotionally. But apathy can feel strangely empty instead. There is no strong sadness, no dramatic emotional pain. The desire simply fades. Doctors and researchers now recognize something called mild behavioral impairment, or MBI. Studies published through the National Institute on Aging suggest that sudden personality or motivation changes later in life, especially in people without a long history of mental health problems, may sometimes signal increased risk for future cognitive decline. In other words, the brain can begin changing emotionally before memory problems become obvious. I remember meeting the wife of a retired mechanic who sat across from me fighting tears. She said, "He's still here, but it feels like part of him already left." Her husband looked completely calm beside her. He insisted nothing was wrong. And from his perspective, that was true. He was not suffering in the way people imagine illness. He simply no longer felt pulled toward the things that once gave his life energy and meaning. That emotional flattening can be incredibly subtle at first. People stop initiating conversations. They avoid hobbies. They lose curiosity. Their reactions become muted. Even laughter may become less frequent. Families often interpret this as laziness, stubbornness, or simply getting older. But healthy aging alone does not usually erase emotional engagement with life. And this matters because social and emotional stimulation are deeply protective for the brain. Human connection activates memory pathways. Purpose activates attention systems. Curiosity keeps the brain flexible and responsive. When motivation fades, the brain often becomes less active overall. Now, once again, this sign alone does not mean dementia. Retirement transitions, grief, loneliness, chronic stress, poor sleep, medication side effects, and many health conditions can all reduce motivation temporarily. But if the change feels new, persistent, and deeply out of character, it deserves attention. Especially if multiple loved ones have quietly noticed the same thing. Sometimes the earliest brain changes do not appear as confusion. Sometimes they appear as silence. And sometimes the most important warning sign is not what a person forgets, but what they slowly stop caring about. Sign number 3. When words begin slipping away, almost everyone has experienced this moment. You are in the middle of a sentence. The word is right there. You can almost feel it forming. And then suddenly, it disappears. So you pause. You wave your hand in the air. You say something like, the thing you use to cut bread. Everyone around you understands what you mean, and life moves on. Most of the time, this is completely normal. As we age, the brain naturally becomes slightly slower at retrieving information. That does not mean the brain is failing. In fact, healthy older adults often know more words than younger people do. The challenge is simply accessing them quickly under pressure. But there is an important difference between occasional forgetfulness and changing speech patterns. That difference is what doctors pay attention to. Researchers studying early Alzheimer's disease have found that subtle language changes can appear years before major memory problems. The issue is not only forgetting words. It is how the brain compensates when those words no longer arrive naturally. For example, instead of saying microwave, someone may consistently say the food heater. Instead of remote control, they may call it the TV thing. At first, these substitutions seem harmless, even funny. But over time, they may become more frequent, repetitive, and strangely unnoticed by the person speaking. That last part matters. When healthy people lose a word occasionally, they usually recognize it immediately and become frustrated. They know something slipped. But when the brain begins changing neurologically, people may stop realizing their language itself has changed. I once met a retired engineer who became visibly frustrated during our conversation. Several times, he stopped mid-sentence and snapped his fingers while searching for words that never came. His wife gently explained that this had started happening almost daily. "He talks around words now," she said quietly. "And sometimes his stories just fade away halfway through." That description was incredibly important. Because another early sign can be difficulty holding thoughts together long enough to finish speaking clearly. The brain loses flow. Sentences become slower. Thoughts trail off. Stories lose structure. Conversations become harder to follow. And often, family members notice these changes before the person speaking does. Now, let me share a small exercise neurologists sometimes use in cognitive testing. Try naming as many animals as possible in 60 seconds. Most healthy adults over 60 can usually name somewhere between 15 and 20 animals. Some even more. If someone struggles badly, repeats the same few animals, or becomes stuck very early, it does not automatically mean dementia, but it may suggest that the brain's language retrieval system deserves closer evaluation. And again, context matters enormously. Poor sleep, stress, anxiety, hearing loss, medications, and simple fatigue can all affect communication temporarily. This is not about panicking every time you forget a word. It is about noticing patterns. Are the pauses becoming more frequent? Are conversations changing? Have loved ones quietly commented on it more than once? Because language is not just communication. It is one of the clearest windows into how the brain is functioning beneath the surface. And sometimes, the brain begins whispering through our words long before memory itself begins to fail. Sign number 4. When the brain starts struggling to walk and think at the same time, think about someone you love walking down a hallway. Before you even see them, you already know who it is. Not because of their voice, not because of their face, but because of the sound and rhythm of their footsteps. Every human being has what neurologists sometimes call a motor signature, a unique pattern of movement created by the brain coordinating balance, timing, posture, muscle control, and spatial awareness all at once. And here is something most people never realize. Walking is not automatic. Your brain is performing thousands of calculations every second just to help you move smoothly through the world. That means subtle brain changes can sometimes appear in movement years before obvious memory problems ever begin. Researchers at institutions including Harvard and Johns Hopkins have found that slower walking speed, reduced balance, and something called dual task interference may appear long before a dementia diagnosis. Now, dual task interference sounds complicated, but the idea is actually simple. A healthy brain can usually handle two tasks at the same time without much difficulty. For example, walking while talking, walking while counting, walking while thinking. But when certain brain networks begin weakening, the brain starts struggling to multitask. And movement is often the first thing sacrificed. I once evaluated a man in his early 70s who insisted he felt completely healthy. He had no major pain, no obvious limp, no recent falls. But his wife noticed something strange. "He moves differently now," she told me. At first, she could not explain it clearly. She simply said he seemed slower crossing the street and more cautious moving around crowded places. So I asked him to perform a simple test. First, I had him walk normally down the hallway. No problem. Then I asked him to walk again while counting backward from 107s. And suddenly, Everything changed. His steps slowed dramatically. He hesitated mid-walk. His posture stiffened. At one point, he nearly stopped moving entirely while trying to think. Not because he could not do the math, because his brain no longer handled both tasks smoothly at the same time. That is what caught my attention. Studies suggest these kinds of subtle movement changes may emerge 10 to 15 years before dementia symptoms become obvious enough for diagnosis. And once you understand this, you begin noticing it. Everywhere. Someone pauses walking whenever they speak. They shuffle slightly while concentrating. Their balance changes during conversation. They move more cautiously in unfamiliar environments. Again, this does not automatically mean dementia. Aging affects muscles, joints, vision, hearing, and reaction time naturally. Arthritis alone can completely change how a person walks. But doctors pay attention when movement patterns change alongside cognitive strain, especially when family members notice it first. Here is a simple exercise you can safely try at home. Walk slowly across a room while naming animals out loud. Cat, horse, elephant, giraffe, dog, rabbit. Most healthy brains can manage both tasks fairly easily. But if walking suddenly becomes hesitant or awkward while thinking, it may reveal how hard the brain is working behind the scenes. And that matters because healthy movement is deeply connected to healthy cognition. Every step activates blood flow to the brain. Balance challenges stimulate neural pathways. Physical activity strengthens cognitive reserve, the brain's backup capacity against aging and disease. Sometimes the brain does not first reveal trouble through memory. Sometimes it reveals itself through motion, through hesitation, through slowing down, through the quiet moment when walking no longer feels automatic anymore. Sign number 5. When your dreams start escaping into the real world, imagine waking up in the middle of the night and finding your bedsheets thrown across the room. Your partner looks frightened. They tell you that you were shouting in your sleep, kicking, punching, thrashing your arms as if you were fighting someone. And you remember absolutely none of it. Most people laugh this off at first. They blame stress, a strange dream, maybe too much coffee late at night. But sometimes, the brain is signaling something much deeper. This condition is known as REM sleep behavior disorder, often shortened to RBD. And among neurologists, it is considered one of the strongest early warning signs associated with certain neurodegenerative diseases, especially Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's-related cognitive disorders. To understand why this matters, you first need to understand something fascinating about normal sleep. During REM sleep, the stage where most vivid dreaming occurs, the brain temporarily paralyzes the body. That is actually a protective mechanism. Your brain allows you to dream about running, shouting, or defending yourself without physically acting out those movements in real life. In REM sleep behavior disorder, that protective off switch begins malfunctioning. So instead of remaining still during dreams, the body starts moving along with them. And sometimes those movements become violent. Researchers from the Mayo Clinic Sleep Center found that many patients diagnosed with REM sleep behavior disorder later developed neurological conditions years afterward, in some cases nearly a decade later. That does not mean everyone with unusual sleep behavior will develop dementia, but it does mean the symptom deserves serious attention instead of dismissal. I once spoke with a woman whose husband had become increasingly restless at night. At first, she thought he was simply having nightmares. Then one evening, he accidentally struck her during sleep while dreaming that someone was breaking into the house. The next morning, he had no memory of it at all. What frightened her most was not the movement itself. It was how completely unaware he seemed afterward. And this is incredibly common with RBD. The person sleeping often feels perfectly normal. Meanwhile, the partner becomes the first witness to the problem. That is why loved ones are so important in recognizing early neurological changes. They notice the shouting, the sudden jerking movements, the kicking, the falling out of bed, the emotional intensity during dreams. Now, let me be clear once again. Occasional movement during sleep is normal. Many people talk in their sleep. Some people twitch occasionally. Stress and medications can trigger vivid dreams temporarily. But repeated physical acting out behaviors during dreams, especially in older adults, should never simply be ignored. Sleep is not just rest for the brain. Sleep is repair. Sleep is detoxification. Sleep is memory processing. Sleep is neurological maintenance. And when sleep patterns begin changing dramatically. The brain may be revealing vulnerabilities long before daytime symptoms appear. What makes this sign especially important is that it often appears years earlier than obvious memory decline. Years. That creates a powerful opportunity. An opportunity to investigate, to protect brain health aggressively, to improve sleep quality, cardiovascular health, exercise, stress management, and medical monitoring while the brain still has strong reserve capacity. Sometimes the earliest warning signs of dementia do not appear during the day at all. Sometimes they emerge quietly in the middle of the night, while the rest of the world is asleep. Tonight, before you go to sleep, I want you to remember something important. Dementia does not usually arrive overnight. Very often, the brain whispers for years before it finally screams. And those whispers may appear in places most people never expect. First, we talked about the nose, how a fading sense of smell can sometimes signal early changes in the brain's memory centers long before obvious forgetfulness begins. Then we explored apathy, the quiet loss of motivation, curiosity, and emotional engagement that families often notice before the person experiencing it does. After that came language changes, the missing words, unfinished thoughts, and subtle speech shifts that can reveal how the brain is struggling beneath the surface. We then discussed movement and walking patterns, the way multitasking suddenly becomes harder, the slowing steps, the hesitation that may emerge years before diagnosis. And finally, we talked about REM sleep behavior disorder, when dreams begin escaping into physical movement during sleep, sometimes becoming one of the earliest neurological warning signs of all. 5 signs. None of them centered purely on memory. And that surprises many people, because for decades, most of us were taught that dementia begins with forgetting. But modern brain science now shows us something much more complex and much more hopeful. The earlier we recognize changes, the more opportunities we create. Opportunities to improve sleep, to protect blood vessels and heart health. 2. Exercise the brain and body, to stay socially connected, to reduce inflammation, to seek medical advice before symptoms become severe, and perhaps most importantly, to stop ignoring what the body may already be trying to say. Now listen carefully to me here. Experiencing one or even several of these signs does not mean your future is doomed. Far from it. The brain remains adaptable throughout life. Healthy habits still matter in your 70s, 80s, and beyond. People can slow decline. People can improve quality of life. People can remain independent far longer than they imagine. Fear helps no one. Awareness helps everyone. So if something in today's video felt familiar, do not panic. Simply pay attention. Talk openly with your loved ones. Speak honestly with your doctor. Take your brain health seriously, not out of fear, but out of respect for the life you still want to live. Because growing older is not the end of your story. And protecting your mind means protecting your memories, your relationships, your independence, and the moments that still lie ahead. Now I would genuinely love to hear from you. Which of these 5 signs surprised you the most? And have you ever noticed any of them in yourself or someone you care about? Leave a comment below and join the conversation. If this video helped you, please like, share, and subscribe so more older adults and families can learn these early warning signs together. And remember, sometimes noticing the smallest changes early can create the biggest difference later.